Hey there from Lake LBJ. I was reminded recently of a journey I took with a company called Digicon Geophysical, which did oil exploration in the up in the northeast of the United States. And I had some amazing adventures with them very early in my life. Um, this one time we went to New Bedford, Massachusetts, which resembles the movie The Perfect Storm with George Clooney and Mark Wahlberg. It's the crustiest bunch of fishermen and offshore people you ever want to meet, and really a nice group of people. But they thought we were crazy when we told them that our crew was going up above St. John's to the northeast to do oil exploration in late October of the year. They thought that was nuts because that's where the Gulf Stream and the Labrador Current come together and spill into the North Atlantic Ocean, and it produces what's called the Great Atlantic Rollers. If you ever hear anybody talk about those, it's just a big swell in the ocean when you get into a storm, and causes these huge rolling waves all across that region, all the way to Greenland. And so we get in this ship, about 40 men, and my observation was that they were all sort of grumbling at each other, and didn't like having to give up drinking. They never liked that, but they had to because they got on board the ship, and it's against the company policy, to have alcohol. So they were feeling pretty low about that, and we all had a few beers in the harbor with the fishermen before we left, and we took off. And one of the more memorable parts of the journey early on was going through the Cape Cod Canal, and we got a good look at all those stunningly beautiful mansions back there in Cape Cod area, and where a lot of that New York money goes. It was unbelievable, the houses. And you cut through the Cape Cod area and go into the open ocean and up around Nova Scotia. And the navigator once told us that we were crossing over right where the Titanic sank. And I can tell you, it's just a lonely, open part of the ocean, very cold, even in October, when it's not really all that cold out there. And so we went up and we went around to St. John's, Newfoundland. And when you approach St. John's from the ocean, it's quite dramatic. You see this long line of cliffs out there way across the water, and the navigator is telling you that St. John's is right there. There's a big harbor there, but you can't see anything. And gradually, as you get closer and closer to these cliffs, they grow taller and taller and taller, and you still can't see any opening in this giant, looks like a giant stone wall that's just enormous. And I felt like I was in like a Jason and the Argonauts kind of movie, these huge stone structures. And finally, when you get up real close to it, you can see a kind of a diagonal passage that cuts through there. And when you go through this tall passage with these tall walls, you come through into this gorgeous harbor. All of a sudden, there's no more wind, and these lovely churches and beautiful green hills and pretty painted houses. And St. John's, Newfoundland is beautiful. It's a lovely place. We hung out there for about 2 weeks while we were getting supplied and tuning up our computers. We had to wait for some computer stuff, and we hung around the boys like that because they don't have to work much. They can hang around the bars and go chase girls and stuff, and that was an amazing time just in and of itself, hanging around St. John's for 2 weeks. And so then we get all ready, and we set out of St. John's Harbor into the North Atlantic. And it was so impressive, as we just cruised. There's this beautiful, gentle sway of the ocean. It's a 300-foot ship just passes so smoothly up and down, and there's a little side-to-side kind of rock, and and the sun's shining, and there's shorebirds everywhere just skidding along the top of the ocean, and it's just beautiful out there when the weather's nice, which it was very nice for about the first 5-6 days. We traveled about 350 miles to the northeast of St. John's. If you know anything about that area, you are out in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean, no help in sight. It's just you and that boat. And, I would say, one of the great tragedies of human life, to me, is that more people don't really get to experience the ocean. They may have been to the beach, and they may have gotten to sail on a sailboat, but they have not really spent time living out on the ocean, because it's really an amazing thing, a luxury that I've been able to enjoy and have loved every second of it. But we spent a good 5-6 days. I say I've loved every second of it. I loved every second of it when the ocean was behaving well. And so we start tuning up all our equipment. And as I've explained before, a deep water seismic exploration ship has a lot of heavy equipment on it to do its job. It has a big hydraulic spool, big giant spool on the back of the ship that has about 1.5 miles or 2 miles of this cable, seismic phone cable, hydrophone cable. And there's a giant buoy on the end of it about the size of a Volkswagen. You throw that in the water and you let it stream out behind the ship. And it has these sensitive phones in it that feed information back into the computer room on board the ship. And then you have these 2 big hydraulic arms that stretch out on either side of this big ship. And it's got these long compressed air guns that are hung down on cables. And there's about 4 or 5 of these giant Ingersoll Rand compressors on the back deck of the ship, and they supply air into those air guns. And when you get all that tested and tuned up and firing in sync like the people like it, it's almost like being on a British man-of-war ship when all the cannons are firing at the same time. And if you can imagine being on board something like that when every 10-15 minutes for days on end, you would hear this giant boom, and you would feel the whole ship shake. That's what the guns are like when we've got them down 30 feet into the water and they're dragging behind the ship. And so we're sending that energy down to the seafloor, and it's bouncing back up, and we're collecting that information on this seismic cable. And that's our job. And so as we cruised out to the northeast of the Atlantic Ocean, northeast of St. John's, and in the direction of Greenland, the weather was very much like I'm sitting in now. It was chilly, but it was sunny. It was beautiful, and the water was a lot more blue than this Lake LBJ here. It was just stunningly beautiful. Beautiful shorebirds following us way out offshore. I don't know how they did it. So anyway, we get out there. We got everything working pretty good. We've arrived at the job site, and we're getting all tuned up and ready to go. And we have enjoyed this beautiful weather for many days now, and everybody is in a very relaxed, calm state. And on board the ship, they've gotten very casual, I would say, about battening down everything. And you have to appreciate on a ship, like in the galley, the cook has all kinds of cabinets with latches, and all of his equipment, has tie downs, and even on the dinner table, you got this rubber mat that the dishes have to sit on, and they got, certain little things that keep the dishes from sliding off the table, but and everybody, generally keeps their stuff stowed away, they say, on a ship. And but at this time, we were not properly stowed away, and without very much warning at all, this weather came up on us, and it all of a sudden it felt like we had been hit by a Mack truck almost. All of a sudden these waves started hitting us, and the ship, which had been traveling, kind of at this gentle, sort of roll over the ocean, now is just like, and it's got, crashing waves breaking over the bow, and we are rising, sharply, 30, 35, 40-foot waves, and then peaking and coming down, in a very short period of time. That's how the ocean changed on us. And all of a sudden, all the things that were up on the counters and in the kitchen especially, Cookie was cooking us dinner at the time, all right? And he's got a bunch of the cabinets open. He's got a big pot of lobsters that was just starting to get warm, just starting to boil on the stove, and it just thrown them in there into some boiling water, and also they had a fryer, and all of a sudden the grease is all spilling out of the fryer, and the lobster pot had turned over, and a bunch of those lobsters were sliding down the big hallway of the ship, and everybody is thrown around. And this was absolutely chaotic. All of a sudden, you got these big winds. The ship, there's a motion that big ships have that you've probably seen on TV, and it's called scooping, okay? And when a ship goes way up on a wave, and then the bow of that ship drops down, and it shoots right into the water and scoops a bunch of ocean right out of the ocean and throws it back over its wheelhouse, right over the top of the ship. That's called scooping. And we were in that situation, within 20 minutes, all of a sudden, the ocean is just throwing everything it's got at us. And we're pulling a 2-mile cable that we can't just roll up. We got all our equipment out in the water. And there's people, there's alarms going off. There's, on the microphone throughout the ship, the captain's going, yeah, we need to do this. You guys need to do that. I mean, everybody put on your survival gear, and everybody batten down, close that back door. There's just chaos on board. So we're pretty much in a position where the ship has no option. You can't just roll everything up and turn around and go home when the sea goes like that. This is what we learned. That's what I learned. They probably already knew, but I didn't know. And all of a sudden now, the ship is in a position where we've got to continue traveling toward the seas, which are coming from the Greenland area. From the ocean is now coming at us from the northeast in a big way. And we have no other option except to keep motoring in the direction of those waves. We cannot turn around. We cannot cut our cable loose. It's worth millions of dollars. And we can do nothing except continue to navigate that ship in the direction into the seas, is what they call it. And you have to go directly into the seas. You can't turn the ship around and go away from the sea because it'll capsize you, turn you over. And so in order to keep from sinking, basically, you have to do that. And so for 3 days, this is how we lived inside. All of a sudden, our big old giant 300-foot seismic ship was a freaking beer can, and we were the ants rolling around inside of it for 3 days. And I saw just about everybody, and the biggest, toughest men on board the ship, almost everybody. And when you take human beings and you shake them around like that, even the most seasick resistant men will start just collapsing left and right. And I was very, very lucky that way. But just about everybody on board that ship got desperately seasick after about day 2. Nobody was coming to eat any meals for almost 3 days. And I was one of like 3-4 people that would show up for meals. And so what that did for me, other than getting seasick, which I was grateful. And that sort of immunity to seasickness did not last, because later in life I got on a fishing ship with some of my family members, and I got really seasick, which I was surprised at. But anyway, because I was one of the few who did not get seasick, I was one of the people that was caring for all the other people. And I mean, I cleaned up more vomit than you can possibly imagine. And I took care of men who had slipped and fallen down, who were weak from malnourishment and dehydration. And some of the toughest talking, roughest acting men, are now like weak as a kitten. And you go up in the wheelhouse. Oh, and by the way, we cannot go outside the ship. We can't even open any of the doors or windows. So a ship, a cruise ship with 40 crew members, already smells kind of unctuous. I mean, you can clean it all you want, but the inside of a ship, is most always, at least a commercial working ship, is going to smell a little musty and a little sweaty and a little, nasty, But you get 35 or 40 men throwing up in that baby, you've never smelled it. And it's so cold. It's like, we can't even open the door, because why? If you walk outside, it's instant death on board that deck, because we got massive amounts of water for 24 hours a day, cruising down the sides of the ship and all over the deck. I mean, you're swept into the water, and guess what? If that happens, they will not turn around and come pick you up. You're dead, So we're locked inside this thing, so it's basically a game of try to hang on and be of service if you're able to help people. And sometimes I would go up and sit in the wheelhouse with the captain or the first mate who was driving the ship. And if you've seen that movie, A Perfect Storm with George Clooney, it's just like that, okay? I mean, you're just cruising, all of a sudden up, and then, and water shooting up over the windows. And, I mean, you're just hanging on for dear life for 3 days, or however long that storm lasts. So finally, we went through all of that, and I noticed something unusual. And I guess it's not unusual, but men who had not liked each other before, men who had been kind of frictional, working together, and who had really not had any nice words to say to sometimes anybody. You get some real hard folks out there working offshore, and all of a sudden after that storm, and after being in a situation where you feel like at any given time the thing could go down, even if maybe it wasn't gonna. But I was 19 years old, and I saw how men can come together in the face of adversity. And you get them to feeling better. If you care for them, you bring them a cup of tea or coffee, or clean up after them or something like that, how grateful they are. Now, I'll tell you another thing too that I noticed is that these people came from all different walks of life. You have the ship's crew, who are like the captain, the cook, the people who clean the boat, who run the ship, and then you have the seismic crew, which is, the one I was on, to do the recording of the seismic data and working on the compressed air guns and the streamer cable. And then you have the navigation crew, and you have the compressed air gun mechanics and the guys who do the mechanicking on the air guns, and you have all these different people, and have all kinds of different beliefs. We had one guy who was from Scotland, okay? He had a big red beard and long red hair, and he was just in a foul mood all the time, And he'd say stuff like, "You assholes think you know everything, but you don't know nothing," And nobody seemed to really even remember his name. They always called him the Scotchman, and so we had all kinds of different people on board that ship, and I noticed at one time or another during this incredible storm that in their own ways, they all cried out to God. And that's a universal quality in men. It doesn't matter how they worship Him or if they don't at all, but they know He's there. And when you get into a situation where you know that no effort of yours is really going to get you out of this shit, then you have a tendency to reach out. They say there's no atheists in the foxholes, and I know what they mean. This is a real life and death kind of thing when the ocean and the forces of nature just get angry. And so we all made it back to the shore, and everybody was buying everybody beers, and there was just this fellowship and goodwill towards men, and it was just this beautiful thing, like we all survived something incredible. And I got to thinking about one of my teachers, Roy Williams, over at the Wizard Academy in South Austin. And if you've never been to the Wizard Academy in Oak Hill, down there by the Salt Lick restaurant, you should go and see it. It's a communication, a marketing school. And but anyway, Roy has many quotes and sayings. And one of my favorites is, he says, there's 7.5 billion of us crammed onto a small speck of dust, and we're circling around a fireball, an 11,000 degree fireball, which is rocketing through space at 252 times the speed of a rifle bullet. And when you go outside tonight and you look up at the stars, what you're really looking at is you're looking out the window of our spaceship. And tomorrow, when you wake up and you see the people all around, those are your fellow passengers and crew members. And they may not come from your part of the spaceship, but we're all on the ship together. And if you can get that sense that we're all riding on this rock together, maybe that fellowship will come out. Anyway, thank you. God bless you.